Yo, what's up? It's someone that's no one, and welcome back to another story mix. It's been a while since we had one, as I've just been focusing on other content, but here we are to highlight some of the dissociative reports we've done, which I specifically got a request to cover some PCP reports. We don't have any pure PCP reports, I haven't used in a mix yet, but most reports here do contain PCP or an analog. We haven't done too many PCP reports yet, surprisingly. And also joining me again today to read some stories is Cannabis. Cannabis collabs a lot with us and is a good homie of mine. You've probably seen him in some past videos of mine, so make sure to go give him a sub. But besides that, that's all I got for you, so make sure to like and subscribe, and tell me what you want to see in the next mix, and anything else you may want to see. It's been someone that's no one, and without further ado, let's dive right into this. Where are your legs? Bro, I love your videos. Keep up the good work. One day, I was hanging at my house with my close friend Ray, who was a year younger than me and about 140 pounds, if I had to guess. My mom is single, so she works a lot, leaving me home alone pretty often. We were bored, so we decided to hit up the local plug and meet him around my mailbox. Before we could though, we had to figure out what we wanted. We were probably sitting there for around 30 minutes trying to decide what we should buy. Soon we came to the realization that we'll get all the substances we can buy. We both had around $425 together. We ended up buying 6 tabs of acid, 2 PCP cigarettes each, about a quarter ounce of weed, and some coke. He lived around 40 minutes away, so we just decided to wait at the mailbox till he arrived. Once he did and we got our stuff, we asked him how strong the tabs were, and he said they were around 200 micrograms, but he didn't know for sure. After he left, we were talking about how much we should do of all we got. At the time, we were very reckless with our drug use. We said fuck it, and we both took 3 tabs each. Out of us, Ray was better at rolling blunts, so I gave him a couple and he started rolling. Once we had about 3 or 4, we got on our skateboards and rode to one of our friends, Ethan. I knocked on the door, and he came out and dapped both of us. At this point, we could start to feel the acid coming on. Ray told Ethan what we have done, and he said we were insane, but we soon went off topic. Ray started to spark up a blunt as we got into talking. After we smoked 2 of them, he then invited us inside. We all then said hi to his mom, who seemed to always watch Jeopardy. When we got in his room, he quickly closed and locked the door. He said he had something for us, and both handed us a 3-ounce bottle of Delsum, DXM. The smaller bottle. Ray and I thanked him and left. It was probably about an hour and a half into the trip, and we could barely see the ground as we were skating. I looked up and noticed that all the clouds were moving in these geometric patterns and almost changing colors. Every time a car went by, I could feel the sound the car made as it went past us. We both agreed we were too high to be riding in the road, so we walked the rest of the way back to my house. Once we got back, he asked if I still had the PCP cigarettes, and I said I did. We both smoked one and went inside. We could feel the dissociation starting. Ray kept complaining about falling. Soon he asked where my legs went, and this led me into a state of paranoia from fear of having no legs. I soon got distracted by the gnome who kept speaking in a language that doesn't exist. I grabbed the coke I still had on me. This was hard because all my pockets seemed to be missing and the gnome's voice was very distracting. But eventually, I was able to get the bag from my pocket. When I tried to open the bag, all the coke fell out. I assumed I was holding it upside down. I looked at the bag when the high wore off and there were no tears. We tried to make lines out of what we could, but it was hard over all the laughing from the voices outside, combined with the table moving side to side, almost as if it was made from water. We both had about 3 or 4 lines, maybe 5. But that's when my friend's face turned inside out and kept on flipping into different people I knew. I asked him how he could be Theo and Chastity at the same time, some of my friends. He looked at me with huge eyes and asked why I'm sleeping. This confused me because I could see him and I always thought I was awake. The more I thought about anything, the less sense it made. And this started to get me frustrated, and I punched a hole through the bathroom door by my room. Eventually, Ray realized that I was built out of rubber bands, and we both agreed to keep it a secret. My mouth was getting dry from the weed, and I soon looked over at the bottles of delsum we had on my desk in my room. The more I looked at it, the less real it looked. It almost became a comic book drawing. I grabbed it up, but as I did, it seemed to weigh a lot more than it should. But the longer I held it, the farther away it got from me, so I had to drink it before it escaped. I drank it, and Ray did the same, not fully aware of what we just did. I looked up at the ceiling and noticed that it looked like it was empty, as if it was replaced by nothingness. It was about 3 hours since we took the acid, and we were peaking. Ray didn't seem to be having a fun time though. He just had his face on a pillow while lying on the floor. But this bothered me because I kept feeling someone rubbing against my back, but Ray wasn't behind me. I soon went into a hole of paranoia, but looking at my shifting walls was comforting. I asked Ray what he was doing, and he looked up and said, "Bro, you spelled it wrong." I asked what, and he replied, "You. It's not spelled like that." I agreed and left him alone. He went back to his pillow seemingly instantly. My dissociation almost seemed to be getting stronger, and I got up to turn off the lights, but as I kept on walking towards the light switch, it wouldn't let my hand get close enough. I asked, "Why won't you let me turn you?" And I never got a reply. I looked down and saw the gnome once again speaking his language, but it was almost like I could understand him. I don't remember what he was saying though. I just went back onto my bed and put on the TV. It probably took me about 20 minutes to figure out how to turn it on. I didn't want to deal with figuring out the channels, so I just watched what was on. It happened to be Family Guy, but the more I watched it, the more confused I got. It seemed like the story of the episode was changing every time I blinked, and I kept looking at the time, and it was like each minute was an hour long. So I just lay down and closed my eyes. The echoey sounding noise from the TV was very euphoric. I kept admiring the simplicity and complexity of the closed-eye visuals. It was like I could see every color and no color as I kept going down this spiraling hole of infinite depth. I opened my eyes and found out the weed and coke wore off, and Ray freaking out because he couldn't read his name. I asked him why he couldn't read it, and he pointed to himself and asked if I could read it. I said yeah. Then I said a jumble of sounds that didn't fit any word or letter I knew of, and said, "There, see, I can read it." After I said this, you could see the relief wash over. He basically fell on my bed. DXM makes me extremely tired, so I ended up passing out from that, and also the coke high going out of my system. When I got up, most of the high was gone for both of us. I asked him what happened while I was asleep. He then looked at me with the most concerned look I've ever seen him give. He said the whole night we were talking, and I kept saying things that didn't exist but made sense. After this experience, we both became more cautious of how much we take, but overall, it was a pretty life-changing event. I would have gone into more detail, but most of what happened is impossible to put into words or just wouldn't make any sense if I tried. So, sorry for that.
This report is called Living Dead. Drugs used are PCP and cannabis. Being an ex-dust head, I've had my fair share of experiences with the drug and all varieties of it. The first time was the most incredible, however. My boy had gotten a number from this guy who came into the car wash he worked for. For a tip, the guy gave my boy a dime of some good bud and his pager number. He said he had weed, coke, and heme, which is what black dust is called in some places. We paged this guy later on during the night, and he brought 2 pungent-smelling bags of PCP. The dealer had warned us that this was some New York dust, and possibly to take it easy. So I would later find out New York dust is good, but Hartford wet is the cream of the crop. So me and like 4 of my boys sat down to roll up some black. We twisted up a vanilla Dutch Master with a good amount of weed and put 1 bag of dust in. So we smoked the blunt all the way to the roach, and I'm feeling great. Almost dizzy, body feeling numb, everything's moving slow. Dust is also called the Matrix because you move, speak, and think very slowly, like Neo dodging those bullets. We picked up another one of our friends and went to the mall. He didn't smoke with us, so we tried to keep our high under wraps, which is virtually impossible because we were all spaced out and blank-faced. In the mall, everything was crazy. All the times that I smoked wet after that, I never went into the mall or any place where there is large amounts of people sober. We went into some Japanese Eastern wind chime store and played with the swords. Everything was calm and not at all the rage-induced PCP propaganda the government and media feed us. When we went to leave the mall, me and my boy had lost the other 4 people we came with. After searching high and low, near and far, we realized that they were right fucking in front of us, like 10 feet away. We were so dusted. To make a long story short, we returned home and smoked another dust blunt. This one kind of puff put me out over the limit. I was very disassociated for 4 or 5 hours. However, I woke up the next day at 7 a.m. for work, and I was fine. No hangover, no fatigue, nothing. This is perhaps what made the drug so desirable for me. Now the moral of the story is, aside from my personal problems with wet, the drug is not that bad when used on an extremely casual basis, in low doses. Dust is no worse than shrooms or coke. I have smoked angel dust batches that contained PCP, and embalming fluid. Just PCP and just embalming fluid, formaldehyde, and methanol. And never have experienced any rage, psychoses, or aggressive behavior. Slight depression, yeah, but none of the images of Rodney King or anything of the sort. I think I know how this drug affects me. It's more based on me and less of the drug. That's just my analysis. You shouldn't smoke angel dust, but if you do, keep it moderate and everything should be alright. Just my opinion. And this is coming from the year 2003, so there's kind of an old lingo to this. I will explain that angel dust, sherm, there's all these names, wet, those are all PCP names, the street names of PCP. So, yeah. So, what exactly is PCP and how is it used? Since PCP is a Schedule II drug in the United States of America, that means that it has been used as a medical purpose. So you can see other drugs like cocaine are Schedule II, because those 2 drugs have been used in medicine, and any drug that's been used in medicine is usually Schedule II. PCP was developed in the 1950s, and they used to do intravenous injections. But then they realized that it was causing all of this agitation, delusion, and irrationality. But today when people use PCP, they use it for the mind-altering, hallucinogenic effects that it produces. Mostly the disassociation that comes along with it. And I know in lower doses it's very good for painting or doing art, things like that recreationally. But like some of the reports say, it's not good to use on a regular basis. Take it moderately and make sure you're responsible with it.
I am a mannequin. Start. Insulfiated. It has the same acrid petroleum flavor as 3-MeO PCE but does not sting at all. 14 minutes in. Begin to feel the onset of the experience. This manifests as a sort of lightheadedness. 30 minutes in. I am simultaneously feeling heavy and light, with a slight tingling numbness in my extremities. No other effects noted as of now. I definitely feel altered, but just barely. 1 hour in. I am still not feeling very much at all. There is a sense of mental dissociation there, but it's faint and elusive. I decide to redose with another 10 milligrams. At this point, I am noticing open-eyed visuals in the form of faint dark and light horizontal bands flashing across my vision. 1 hour 30 minutes in. I decide to go outside and smoke a joint I had rolled beforehand. I lost the joint among my bed sheets, but find myself perfectly capable of locating it again, indicating that I am not impaired to any meaningful degree. I go outside and relax in the bathtub we have stationed back there.
I smoke the joint and sink into the ambient noises of the neighborhood. 1 hour 40 minutes in. The experience feels as though it's picked up substantially. Interestingly enough, the physical dissociation does not extend beyond a numbness of my extremities. There's no wobbliness or hallucinatory sense of motion or loss of body. I am still quite corporeally grounded. I feel like I have been suddenly separated from the world subtly and stealthily, as though a rug has been quickly and quietly pulled out from under me. I am now floating in my own bubble, separated by some indescribable barrier from a world I can still sense, a world I can still see and hear as it bustles around me. It is as if a cold and sterile scalpel has made a cut so thin and clean that it has rent reality apart and left me partitioned in my own private space. The opened-eye visuals now manifest as flashing faint diamond patterns, especially visible against lights, like that of my laptop. It looks like two bulges are pulsing on either side of my field of vision, the same sort of peripheral shadows one may see when one rubs the corner of one's eye. The closed-eye visuals are almost like video clips, vivid and clear, built from my memories of the many-day protest I witnessed in the city that morning, the masses of people and signs and banners and the faceless black bloc and the energy of people in resistance. I feel like my face is drooping and melting in a most surreal and ethereal manner, like tentacles are hanging down from it. This is not so much of a physical sensation as it is some odd discrepancy in my normal perception. 2 hours in, I begin feeling a sort of warm, sweaty, moist graininess that I feel from dissociatives, like all of my flesh has been replaced with wet sand and that the interstices between these grains and between them and my skin form numb voids from which a feeling of very shallow anesthesia is derived. Indeed, there is not much feeling in my fingertips. I still do not feel acutely physical dissociated, and with sufficient pressure, this anesthesia is overcome. I am very couch-locked, not in the incapacitating manner instilled by dissociatives like ketamine, but more in the sense that I just really don't want to move. Stillness feels like my body's natural state. I am quite lucid and clear-headed despite the strong mental dissociation disconnecting me from my environment. I can think coherently and cogently, though the world is instilled with some indescribable weirdness. There is a buzzing in my head and everything feels grainy to the touch, like I am roughly vibrating. 2 hours 15 minutes in. The feeling of sandiness has become more marked and apparent. My head feels as though it is pulsing and sliding around, like it has broken free of its moorings in a windstorm. It physically feels as though my head is sinking inwards three-dimensionally, like there is a black hole at the center of my brain. It feels as though a band has been tied tightly around my skull and is squeezing my thoughts closer together. My movement is light and liberated, and my every action carries extra momentum, like my extremities are heavy and my limbs are light. The sense of separation has manifested as everything feeling ethereal and drifting around me, though despite all this, the experience is still quite mild and I do not feel acutely impaired or incapacitated in any way. 3 hours in. I smoke some more cannabis. I feel warm and weird, my body feels like it is made of fuzzy gelatin and my tongue feels numb. The bubble I have been contained in for the duration of the experience is reinforced. It feels like there is a series of concentric spheres around me, pulsing, vibrating, and most importantly, keeping me separate. This separation is now not only a separation from the world around me, but is now a separation from my normal self. I feel as if I have quietly changed into a different person, like this dissociative has spread through my mind like a plague and I didn't notice it until it had fully taken hold. It has stealthily and carefully assassinated me and replaced my former self with a new self, constructed from half-formed memories and odd semblances of human thought. I feel emotionally flat and unempathetic to a disturbing degree. I feel as though I am missing some human essence, that I have been replaced with an artificial humanity that falls directly in the depths of the uncanny valley. I still cannot entirely articulate how I was different. I just was. I must be wary with who I interact with while on this substance, as I may behave in uncharacteristic ways. I notice this in conversation with some people, though they don't call me out. I find myself responding in ways that I would not normally. I feel uninhibited in what I say and what thoughts I form, an implication that my normal state is inhibited by some forms of empathy or humanity. I am an alien trapped inside a sphere, a body snatcher, and a mannequin. 3 hours 30 minutes in. Looking back on the experience at this point, I feel as though I have had amnesia for the past few hours, and that the past few hours have been a distant memory. When sober, I would later realize that I had a decent recollection of the experience, though taking notes certainly helped jog my memory for the sake of writing about it. 4 hours in. I feel like I am coming down now. I only feel that same faintness and numbness in my extremities and that sensation of tightness wrapped around my head. 4 hours 30 minutes in. Mostly back to baseline, though my head still feels heavy. At this point, I smoke more cannabis and find myself rocketed back into the thick of the cognitive aspect of the experience. I begin to ascribe deep importance to all sorts of minor stimuli I am being subjected to. I find myself constantly getting distracted and falling into super deep focus on each distraction only to get distracted again. The headspace at this point is potently psychedelic and is reminiscent of other psychedelic dissociatives. Though there are no accompanying visuals or sensory effects, I read through news stories and vividly imagine the events surrounding each one, creating detailed and emotionally compelling narratives in my head, empathizing with each character in each story. Perhaps this sudden hallucinated empathy is me coming back into myself to compensate for the total flatness I was feeling before. 7 hours in. Back to baseline now. I go to sleep. Conclusion. This dissociative holds value for its novelty, though I did not find it particularly useful. The near total lack of physical effects was interesting, as was the all-consuming cognitive dissociation. It was not physically stimulating, but was quite mentally stimulating. The sense of disconnection from the world and from myself was stark and would have been startling had I not sunken into it so gradually. The sensory effects were mild and nondescript. Overall, this is an odd drug, though I really do not see any way I could utilize it in the future, whether it be for introspection or for social settings. I would hardly call this a dissociative, in fact. It is its own unique and totally novel sort of alteration, though not one that I am eager to revisit. I would most compare the headspace to OPCE, dull, neutral, and emotionless, though, as I mentioned, without physical effects.
Just another tidbit about PCP that y'all might be wondering about is the fact that it is a very powerful anesthetic drug. So anesthetic means that you usually can't feel pain or anything that happens. So I want to speak on law enforcement, and I want to speak on the cases that you see where people are kind of wondering how this guy is still standing up. You know, a cop might shoot this guy 4 times, 5 times, and he's still running at you. And this is all caused because PCP is a powerful anesthetic. They do not feel pain in the moment. So I feel like those stories and maybe some of the laws should change for people that have bad PCP experiences, because you're not going to get somebody with bullets. You're not going to get somebody with a taser. They cannot feel anything at the moment, and they're out of their mind. So I just wanted to explain how being an anesthetic and treating people who are on it with violence is not really a good idea. Especially when it comes to guns. You could fire 4 shots into a person and they would still come at you on PCP. Like I said, it's a very powerful anesthetic, and I hope we can all do better. I don't know how many years it'll take, but I hope we can find another method instead of killing people with things that they can't even feel. You know, it took I watched this one video and it took 8 bullets to bring this guy down. And that's crazy. So I hope there's a change in the laws where cops can be more respectful and understand what drug they're under. And maybe instead of using violence or using a gun or something else, you could come up with something better that can help these people. You know, put them in cuffs and let them wait it out in jail. You know, that could be another helpful thing. But the lesson is here that PCP is an anesthetic, basically. So that's the lesson that I'll tell. I don't know if you guys knew that or not, but that's why typical law enforcement stuff does not particularly work on this drug.
Welcome to Waterworld. It doesn't rain much in California, but everyone's always wet. The drug in discussion is PCP, also known as water in its liquid form. It is a scarce drug to find these days aside from certain areas in California and parts of the East Coast. Before I share my experience, I offer a fair warning. PCP is unlike any other drug I have ever heard of or experienced. It affects everyone differently from my experience, and while some can enjoy it and find it pleasurable, others become extremely disoriented and find the effects overwhelming, sometimes to the point of freakouts. With this in mind, come with me as we stroll down the dark and twisted memories of my encounters with Sherm. I was always interested in PCP growing up. I tried various hallucinogens and smoked pot daily since age 13, but for some reason, the negative dark stigma the media associated with PCP lured me in. At age 17, I got my first chance to try it. I'd met a local blood member, set at a party, and got his number after a couple of hours of drinking and sharing blunts with him. He informed me he had wet all day, so I called him 2 or 3 days later and set up a deal for a dip. We met up at a local Target store and sat down on the wall behind it. He pulled out a Newport 100 cigarette and a small brown bottle he called a vial. I handed him the cash and he unscrewed the bottle lid, revealing a neck hole just the size for a cigarette to fit into. I immediately smelled a strong chemical odor which can best be described as a mix between acetone and Sharpie marker. The smell stung my nose, but I instantly loved it. He then rolled the cigarette between his fingers to loosen the tobacco and dunked the cigarette into the vial about a quarter of the way down. He then quickly pulled it out and began drawing through it repeatedly to get the liquid to travel up the cig. He repeated this 2 more times and the entire cigarette was wet and brown to the filter. He placed the dip into his mouth and ripped the filter out with his teeth, lit another cig, and passed the dip to me. He explained that an open flame could not touch the water or it would flame up and waste the dip, so he passed the other cig to me and I placed the cherry of it to the tip of the water. After a few pulls, I inhaled deeply and felt a cool, slight numbing tingle throughout my throat and lungs. The taste can be described as eating a magic marker ink cartridge, except slightly more metallic. I passed the dip back to my supplier and looked up to the sky. The first effects were felt within 3 to 4 minutes and came on very strangely. At first, I felt numb. My mouth, my stomach, lungs, fingers, and almost all skin is numb. Obviously, the chemical was first created as an anesthetic, and it is a very good one indeed. The next thing I notice is that I'm beginning to daydream. I completely lose track of whatever conversation I was currently having or whatever thought was currently in my head. I felt a floating sensation and suddenly the drug peaks. Keep in mind that by this time, the dip is getting passed back to you for the 3rd or 4th time, and I don't want to act like a punk, so I take another pull. This stage, after 6 to 8 hits, is what I call dusted. Walking is practically impossible. Vision is extremely blurry and somewhat strobe-like, and weird noises sound from far away. The feeling is like being in a dream. You can see everything around you and somewhat recognize what it is, but it all looks foreign and strange. Words sound strange, and speaking feels weird. Nothing seems real. Everything seems slightly dark and grim with a sadistic undertone, but at the same time I felt invincible, courageous, and impervious to anything. At one point during the smoke out, I began to think of my parents and siblings, and I realized I'd forgotten who they were. I could picture their faces in my mind, but couldn't associate any names or memories with them. I could slightly remember my name and who I was, yet I couldn't. I lost my connection with reality, my point of living, and what life even was. Yet I wasn't scared or worried. I absolutely loved it. These newfound realizations swirled through my head, and I just sat on the wall with a dead blank stare on my face for about 20 minutes, known as getting stuck. By this time, we finished the dip off, and I thanked my supplier and headed to my friend's house. I was totally out of my mind on the walk, but I loved it. I felt as if I was floating above myself, watching myself walk in a fantasy world, and it was an amazing experience. The effects lasted 3 or 4 hours, and the come down was a gentle and smooth ease back into reality. I slept fine that night and found no residual effects or hangover the next day. My lungs were fine as well and didn't seem all irritated by the harsh chemical. I smoked water 5 or 6 times after that within the next couple of months until my supplier was killed in a drive-by shooting mid-August 2010. Since then, I've yet to find anyone with connections to water, but I eagerly await the day I can try some again. It is such a surreal and mystical experience that I absolutely love, and I know that the memories of these trips will stay in my mind forever. In conclusion, I'd like to sum the entire drug in 2 lines from the New York Sherm rapper Tame One. I dipped my cigarettes in the most wicked of liquids, and I had my blacking out just like 6 solar eclipses. Peace, love, and dope.
This report's called Rolling Through Old Film Footage. Drugs used, only PCP. Route of administration is orally. Many years ago, I was sold PCP under the name of meth, which I misunderstood to mean mescaline, a powerful psychedelic drug. If the dealer had told me it was PCP, I wouldn't have kept using it. Yes, I continued to use it, assuming that mescaline was just a very unusual psychedelic. This was long before I took much care to understand the drugs that I take. That didn't happen until I was introduced to dimethyltryptamine, or DMT, many years later. It took an experienced psychonaut, to whom I gave some of my mescaline to tell me that there was no way in hell this was mescaline. I made some inquiries and found out that it was nothing but straight PCP. When I was taking the drug, I used very small amounts. The effects incredibly pleasant and social, so much that me and my friends all used it instead of booze for almost a year. I couldn't dance for shit on this stuff. I'd get stumbly, and I actually fell on my ass on the dance floor once. But the physical sensations and mental pictures were very fun. It is quite different from any psychedelic visuals or even ketamine visuals, more like rolling through old film footage. To be honest, I liked it more than ketamine. I've been told that PCP is quite neurotoxic, which ketamine is not. I'm not up on the current literature, but I remember hearing Carl Jansen speak about ketamine, and in his telling of the differences between the 2 drugs, he mentioned the high neurotoxic potential of PCP. I was taking it orally, diluted in water, so I'm not sure how the dosage relates to smoked PCP, but I can't imagine that you had some brown dirt, weed, or some moldy weed, or some immature buds, and you dipped them in PCP. The effect might not be pleasant at all. Unfortunately, because people tend to take more than less, getting too much would be easy. And too much PCP is not pleasant at all. I only once experienced it, and it was terrifying. My vision closed around me, and I was unable to see. Then I was nauseous, and confused and scared for about 3 hours, and needed to be accompanied by my husband out to the car to wait out the experience. PCP can make one nearly impervious to pain at high doses. Because of this, PCP can make things seem like a good idea that otherwise wouldn't be, leading to the stories of people leaping out of windows, etc. I experienced very confusing physical reality when I was really high on it, like being unable to discern the difference between walking up the stairs and walking down them, or standing still and walking. This could lead to very unusual behavior. High doses of PCP, when I was unfortunate enough to experience them, were very unpleasant, extremely dissociative and numbing. Some people can't walk or move or see or even think how to get out of their situation. It can be very scary.